Hey everyone, it's Black Manga Critic here with another video for Weekly Shonen Jump Thursdays. Obviously it's Saturday, but I wanted to get the video out for you guys, so it's out, enjoy it, and that's what I'm going to say about, all y'all that know the deal. Now for all y'all that don't know the deal, like, comment, and subscribe, hit the notification bell button when you do, follow me on Twitter, and like the page on Facebook. Now getting into The Promised Neverland Chapter 51, this is a great chapter. And I'm only going to really talk about one particular thing because it's what interests me. Well, maybe two things, but mainly I'm going to talk about Sung-Joo's sort of character shift, right? And, just Posuka's art and how that's just always well done. And I always try to give love to both Shirai and Posuka because if you're a mangaka duo, like it's I think it's just in kind of bad taste for, consumer of that particular art to ignore the artist. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, basically I'm going to give some love to Shirai and also give some love to Posuka. So, getting into this chapter in Sung-Joo and his character shift, I think, I don't want to say I called it because I think a lot of people call things and a lot of things tend to be kind of, sort of laid out in front of you, right? And Sung-Joo, sort of turning into a character that's particularly bloodthirsty and wants to eat humans and all of those things. That was kind of put in front of us, right? Two things, right? One, and this is sort of, a shout out to Posuka because Posuka drew Sung-Joo as a character that looks menacing. That's the only time I've ever seen something like that where a character was particularly menacing with a weapon and things like that, but was sort of a pacifist, at least for me, was sort of the Animorph series that I read as a kid. And there was a race called the Hork-Bajir who were very menacing looking, but were vegetarians and ate plant life and stuff like that. So that's not what's going on here in The Promised Neverland. What's going on here with Sung-Joo is Sung-Joo is clearly, he loves to eat humans. And I said this in a previous video when they were introduced. Well, at least when they introduced the sort of idea that they were religious sort of demons and that they didn't eat humans for various reasons. And I just called bullshit on that because it was just look, anytime a shonen manga, especially, right? Maybe it'll be different in a seinen and josei and other manga like that. But anytime you have a particularly religious individual, right, who's sort of saying I'm not going to do particular things because of my religion, right? That doesn't mean shit because people, shift religions all the time. People, become atheists all the time. So for me, looking at it from this world's perspective, it was the only thing stopping Sung-Joo from eating people was some sort of lackadaisical dogma necessarily. I was no, that seemed very bullshitty to me. So we do see that he is in a way, still very much so religious, but what he does, and I love what Shirai does, is that Shirai sort of really shows how religious dogma can be manipulated to the individual that follows said dogma, right? Sung-Joo is hey, I still want to eat, humans, right? But I'm gonna sort of find these loopholes within the religious sort of doctrine that will allow me to eventually eat humans. So for me, it was just you hear people like that all the time, individuals, I'm not gonna call out any religions or anything like that because if you follow a particular faith, then you follow that particular faith. But for this particular world, it was very clear that there are a lot of sort of conditions and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, variables that force individuals to make particular choices. And it seemed at least in Sung-Joo, he was kind of forcing to making a particular decision to not eat humans. So we see that, he very much wants to eat humans. And if I'm going to move into, sort of talking about Musica, right? I think one thing that's interesting about Musica is that she's clearly very much so the most sort of human out of all the demons that we've seen in terms of the aesthetic. So I think that in that way, one thing that I sort of predicted is that Musica is definitely a human demon hybrid. And I'm not sure how that came about, but I do believe that she does not have to eat humans. Because Sung-Joo sort of says you never had a reason to eat humans. And I think that's sort of alluding to the fact that she doesn't have to because it's not something that necessarily satiates her, or she could always eat regular food or whatever. So I think that in one sense, right, Sung-Joo is clearly very much a full-blooded demon, and I think that forces him to need humans for sort of consumption in a certain way. Um, but right at the same time, the religious dogma was supposed to sort of say that, oh, you're not supposed to eat humans, but that's not the case. It's really just like, who, whichever humans are deemed to be, off limits, those are the humans that are off limits, right? And outside of that, they could eat whatever they want. So, that's kind of just like generally what I wanted to say about Sung-Joo and a little bit about Musica, because I think those were the sort of two most important characters in this chapter. So, if we're going to talk about the art is always spot on. And again, like I mentioned, that Posuka, drew Sung-Joo, and I'm pretty sure Shirai had a lot, to do with this, right? Because they are a duo. So, Posuka drew Sung-Joo to look menacing, to look like he was way more demon than Musica was, and that's like done on purpose because I think that later on we'll definitely learn that like demons eat humans primarily as food. Right, and if Sung-Joo is indeed like a full-fledged like demon, right, biologically, then that means that he has a biological sort of imperative, right, like to eat humans, right, to eat food, not necessarily because like he might necessarily need to, but like he probably does need to, but also because like he wants to, right, like that's that biological sort of like instinctive, like sort of imperative like that he has. Going for him, and Musica probably doesn't have that, and that's why she's drawn, right? That's why Posuka draws Musica as very much so sort of hybrid, like demon/human, and we look at her and we see way more of her human side, right? And that's like done on purpose, right? Posuka does that on purpose and draws Musica that way because we're supposed to, sort of respond to her visually as a human, like we're supposed to sort of take in Musica as a human character, and we're supposed to sort of take in Sung-Joo as a demon that has human characteristics, right, in terms of like speech and thought processes, and even like ideology and stuff like that, right? But the demons also have like a particular ideology and speech patterns and stuff like that, and language. So that doesn't really say much. That's why I think that like Musica being drawn as a human says so much about who she is as a human character, and the fact that Sung-Joo is drawn as a demon really says a lot about the sort of biological imperatives that come with that. So if we're going to talk about the art and just like, sort of like the landscape, just again, top-notch stuff, right? We see like when they actually come out of sort of the tunnels, beautiful sort of like spread panel that shows all of this wonderful life, flying sort of like pterodactyl-y kind of like, demon sort of creatures, and just like amazing art. Shading is like fantastic. The light is just done well enough. Well, not well enough, but bright enough so that we, it's not like sort of like washed out, right? Like so that the images aren't washed out. And then when we get to another instance, right? Even just like the way that Sung-Joo is like drawn as a character, his sort of bloodthirsty sort of like nature, that's drawn beautifully. Musica sort of like timid sort of nature is drawn beautifully. But if getting back to the terrain, when we reach the end of the chapter and we notice that like there's actually nothing there, it's so bright, right? And it's interesting because like there are ways in which Posuka uses that brightness in certain moments to show that a particular moment will be heartwarming and sort of loving and particularly warm. But in this moment, it's very much so like a dark moment, and there's a contrast that works there, right? That is really, really striking. Because you would think that like in this particularly dark moment, it wouldn't be so bright, but it's so bright. And that the nothingness of that brightness is so blinding that when we do reach that final sort of panel, it's like, man, like it really hits you. You're like, like at one point, even just in a previous chapter, we got a conversation that was very, very bright. And that brightness worked to, the advantage of Posuka to show a heartwarming moment. And now we get a very dark, very desolate, depressing moment, and it's still just as bright aesthetically. And I think that's really, really interesting. I just really appreciate what Posuka does with the art, with sort of like, choosing when to use particular aesthetic devices and things of that nature. So, I love The Promised Neverland. It's probably my favorite manga in Jump. Like I always say that like Hunter x Hunter would be that, but it can't be because it comes out too infrequently. And don't get me wrong, like it's probably my second favorite manga, like in Jump right now. But The Promised Neverland continues to raise its game. The mangaka duo that is Shirai and Posuka continue to elevate their game, and the story is just wonderful. I heard a lot of people talking about the fact that like, oh, after they escaped the Grace Field house, things would get a little slow. But I knew it wasn't going to get slow because it was very clear that Shirai had planned that arc very specifically, and like he really worked on it, right? And everything that would come after the Grace Fieldhouse arc was going to be like very sort of expansive, and it feels very expansive, and we get way more information, and I'm just looking forward to the rest of the story. So that's all I'm going to say about The Promised Neverland, chapter 51. Like I said in the beginning, like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell button when you do. If you're already subscribed, you know the deal. Just look out for more content. And I'm the Black Manga Critic with a review of The Promised Neverland, Chapter 51, and I'm out.